Hamas has promised to responsibly examine the plan. The words there by the Foreign Ministry spokesperson of Qatar, Majid al-Ansari, answering a question about the response of Hamas. He said it was only handed to them, referring to the US Trump plan. It was only handed to them very late last night after 11:30 p.m., obviously indicating that they're going to need some time to get back to them. He was also asked by our colleague Asad Beg about whether the Qataris have accepted the apology from Israel, from Benjamin Netanyahu, over the attack launched by Israel on Qatari territory. And his response was that while the state of Qatar reserves all of its legal options, it was content with security assurances offered by the US president that such an attack will not happen again. All right, let's bring in now our guests here in the studio. We're joined by Tamer Qarmout, an Associate Professor of Public Policy, and Muhanad Seloom, Assistant Professor in Critical Security Studies, both from the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Glad that you're here. I've got a lot of questions. We'll try and keep it short and brief and snappy so we can keep it all in. Let me start with Tamer. This plan, it recognizes Palestinian aspirations for statehood, doesn't recognize a Palestinian state, right?
Correct. I mean, it's transitional in nature. It does not really provide any guarantees to a statehood project. But if you're asking me indirectly, Sami, is this the maximum these Arab and Muslim countries could come up with? I would say that's the limits of power and the limits of leverage they have decided to use.
But it's very vague. It says, when you read this plan, Tamer, even after disarmament of Palestinian groups, even after if they manage to demilitarize Gaza, even after if they manage to achieve Palestinian Authority reform, the sentence is, conditions may finally be in place for not a Palestinian state, for a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood, right? That is statehood as a possibility contingent on a precondition, which is contingent on a precondition.
Yes, totally agree, but it's a reflection of this imbalance of power, again, Sami, because if we compare this with the Arab Initiative in 2002 in the Arab Summit in Beirut, it had even a clear path for statehood. And at the time, Arabs had a better chance to exercise their leverage because they were not as fragmented as now.
As they are right now.
Yeah,
all right.
Yes.
Let me bring in Muhanad. From a military strategy perspective, Muhammad, since that's one of your fortes, this plan basically calls for disarmament, demilitarization of Palestinian groups fighting for national self-determination before a state is established, before the occupation really ends, right?
Yes.
How feasible is that? How common is that in this kind of conflict situation?
Well, it's not very common. Israel is behaving as if they are a victor. So they're trying, if you look at the map that has been populated by the White House, you would see that Israel is effectively trying to achieve through negotiations, through this offer, what it has failed to achieve through military means.
And that's not the approach, for example, in Ukraine, where the West is not telling the Ukrainians they need to disarm in order to end the conflict with Russia. They're even supplying them with
Because there is a balance, not a balance of power. Obviously, Russia is stronger, but there is a balance of support. So the West is standing with Ukraine when it comes to the conflict with Russia, but also understanding that Russia is a major power.
Right.
In the case of Gaza and the Palestinians, the United States is on the side of Israel very clearly, even with this offer, because the President of the United States said on TV that this is an ultimatum for Hamas. This is not an offer for peace per se. So what we're looking at is Israel is trying to stay inside Gaza as long as possible because of the complications that they have on the ground. Demilitarization, de-radicalization, the ending of tunnels and all military phases.
You put your finger on an important point when you mentioned the map. I'll come back to that in a moment. But building on what you're saying, the bigger picture here, Tamer, is this Israel trying to achieve a long-standing strategic goal which is normalization with the wider Arab and Muslim world, without first establishing a Palestinian state, right?
I think this would be the biggest concern, that the Arab countries and Muslim countries who have endorsed this initiative accept it as is and do not follow up with concrete actions and leverage to reach to the ultimate and end goal, which is statehood. So I hope.
Can this be negotiable? Especially, what do you make of the fact that we just heard the Turks are coming on board now in the mediation effort?
I think this is interesting. I mean, if there is any hope, when we see some central regional powers aligning together, I mean, we talk about important countries, be it Turkey, be it Egypt, even Qatar, the GCC, Pakistan. So for the first time, we see an alignment between countries that have been competing historically in this region, and they have different interests. But now they all come together within this window, within the limits of powers they have chosen to exercise, and to support this initiative. Right. Now, is this the end result? No, it should not. It should never be. There should be constant effort, more mobilization, more leverage, reaching to the end goal. All right. But it's an opening.
Gentlemen, stay with us for a moment, because Muhanad mentioned the plan, the map, and I think it's important that we take a closer look at this withdrawal plan. At the moment, Israeli forces control all the areas you see on the screen there up to the blue line. Okay, now, according to the plan, once both sides agree to the proposal, the war will end immediately and Israeli forces will withdraw to the agreed line, it says, which is in yellow here in this map, to prepare for the release of the captives. Then we get to the third line after all requirements set out in the US 20-point plan are met and an international stabilization force is deployed. Israeli forces will move further back to the red line, and the final withdrawal line will see the Israelis move progressively further back towards the Israeli border according to an agreement which they must make with the transitional authority, but they will continue to maintain a security buffer zone inside Gaza's borders, including its crossing with Egypt. So, Muhanad, when you see this map, ultimately, Israeli occupation forces stay inside Gaza. They do create a buffer zone. So although the plan says there will be no annexation, there'll be no occupation, basically the occupation continues and they control all of Gaza's border crossings, right?
Indeed, but also it would be very wishful and helpful to look at the map again. If we look at the buffer zone, for example, I think this is the last phase, and I don't think we would reach there very soon. No, we would not. I don't expect that. And the reason is, to me, it looks like they will stay in the yellow line because the requirements.
And we've seen this before in January, the peace deal, that Israel suddenly pulled out of it by March.
Yeah, and there is no war now. What we have here is Israel accepting to cease its military operations against Gaza and against the Palestinian people.
What would it mean to if you have a force in a buffer zone that controls all your borders? This plan doesn't really address the question of the siege, right? Israel would continue to be able to apply a siege when it wants.
Not only that, but also it's one of the major concerns of the Palestinians is the Israeli occupation and controlling of Palestinian lands and their livelihoods and how they would be going in and out. And Israel, according to the detailed plan, it seems that they want to control everything, including the relationship with the ISF, which is the International Stabilization Force.
I think we've got a brief minute. I want to come back to Tamer on this point. Does this plan undermine the ICJ ruling of July 19th? Let's not forget, according to it, Israel is obliged to end the occupation, to pay reparations to the Palestinians, to end the settlements, not as a part of a trade-off, you do this. They were told their presence is illegal. There's supposed to be accountability, right? And an ICC arrest warrant is still out for Benjamin Netanyahu. Where would this plan leave all of that?
I think all these decisions, there is no chance they will be reversed because this is international law in action. It does not depend on Israel as well. These are active cases in the International Court of Justice, in international institutions. They will remain, and even if some parts of some parties decide to overlook them, I think the international civil society, other countries have a moral responsibility to follow on these cases because this is justice, transitional justice, and if it's not achieved, if it's not tackled, this wound will remain open and it will not contribute to any peace process in the future.
Okay, let's thank both of our on-set guests for joining us this hour. Associate Professor of Public Policy, Tamer Qarmout, and Assistant Professor in Critical Security Studies, Muhanad Seloom. Thank you so much.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.